Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Majors and Quinn Facebook page and YouTube channel. My name is Annie. I am the events coordinator at Majors and Quinn Booksellers. If you're not familiar, that's my cat. If you're not familiar with us, Majors and Quinn is an independent bookstore based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So if you have never been there, thanks for tuning in. If you're an old friend, welcome back. Tonight, we're really excited to have another virtual author event for you. And today we're speaking with Ada Calhoun, whose book, Why We Can't Sleep, Women's New Midlife Crisis, was a New York Times bestseller and is recently available in paperback. Ada is going to be talking to us about that book tonight with its fascinating findings and research, and it's just going to be a great conversation. You should chime in. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can use the comments or the chat section to ask Ada your questions. So you can do that at any point in the broadcast, and we will be answering your questions at the end. If you are interested in getting a copy of Why We Can't Sleep, you can do that at majorsandquinn.com, and I will put the link directly to that book in the comments as well. Thank you so much for supporting an independent bookstore by tuning into this broadcast. And if you do happen to be in the Twin Cities area, come and say hello. We are open to limited browsing from 10 to 7 daily. And of course, masks are required, but we would love to see you. That's the thing the booksellers miss the most about in-person events is we don't get to talk to people as much. So come on down and just pop in and pick up a book or two. But if you can't do that, our website is always available. So allow me to please introduce our wonderful speaker tonight. Ada Calhoun is the author of the memoir Wedding Toasts I'll Never Give and The History St. Mark's is Dead. She's collaborated on several New York Times bestsellers and written for the New York Times, New York, and the New Republic. Ada, thank you so much for being here today, and take it away. I look forward to hearing about the book.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks, Annie. Thank you, Max. I'm sad not to be in Minneapolis personally. I used to visit my Norwegian Lutheran grandparents there. And I remember eating a strange brown cheese. It tasted kind of like peanut butter. I don't know if anybody there knows what I'm talking about. Please let me know in the chat if you do. Also, please just leave questions. We can just do full Q&A as far as I'm concerned. But in the meantime, I will just talk a little bit about the book, Why We Can't Sleep. So I should say up front, it is not about how to fall asleep. There are some very angry people on Goodreads who are extremely disappointed that they did not fall asleep upon reading the first page of the book. So it is not a guide for sleep. The book could be called Why We Drink or Why We Throw Things. The book is about midlife crisis. Specifically, it's about Generation X women having a midlife crisis and not really having a way to talk about it, because all the conversation around midlife crises are about, men getting sports cars. And that actually what I discovered in doing the book is that women of this generation have a different midlife crisis than past generations. So, I'll start out by saying this is my third book in the last few years. One was St. Mark's is Dead, which was a history of the street that I grew up on in the East Village. Another was called Wedding Toast I'll Never Give, which was a lot of information about my marriage. This one came out of a story that I did for Oprah.com. So I was having this really awful summer. I'd had a ton of work fall through. I'm a freelancer, and I had one kid going to middle school and one going to college, and I just felt like my career was over and everything felt very depressing. And it was in that moment that I luckily got a call from an editor at Oprah saying, will you write about this experience of midlife for our generation? And she said, I'm having a hard time. A lot of my friends are having a hard time. Are you having a hard time too? And I was, so that was lucky. But I also was very dubious that this was some kind of universal situation. And I thought, this is just, a couple of white women in Brooklyn. This is not some kind of national crisis. She said, just, do some research. So I started calling around the country. I started calling experts, and I started talking to as many women as I could. And what I found was that it was different for us than for our mothers and grandmothers. So our mothers and grandmothers, if they worked, it was like 9 to 5, and if they had families, the families were out of the house by the time the women were 40. So a lot of women of this generation are working full time while going through perimenopause and taking care of aging parents and taking care of a household, and being told to lean in and trying to look amazing and a thousand other things. And that's just new. It's not the way that midlife has been done before. And I thought it was worth examining what that was doing to us. So I wrote this story. It came out, and I got like thousands of messages from women saying that the story made them feel less alone and made them feel seen. And in the course of doing it, I also felt that way. I felt like, oh, this is us. Like, this is our generation, where I'm not alone in this. I'm going through it alongside all these other people who grew up in a similar way that I did. And I found it sort of depressing, but also sort of heartwarming that this was something we shared and across a lot of demographics. Questions I heard included, where did I go wrong? A lot of women were disappointed in midlife and felt like they had somehow not worked hard enough, or they'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. And that if only they could like get the right app or get on the right diet or do the right self-help book, that it was all going to be fine. And my book is an argument that it's really a lot more complicated than that. Another thing I heard was that growing up, we were told, you can be anything, even president. Reach for the stars. It's going to be amazing. This was the first generation of women after Title IX was passed. So there was this idea that we really had to tell young girls, like, this is your time. As a generation, though, we were not given a lot of support in this. So it wasn't like we were told you can be anything, even president, and then given a path to president. 40% for children of divorce. A lot of us grew up poor. We were downwardly mobile as a generation, the first downwardly mobile generation in recent years. And so a lot of us didn't become president or doctors or whatever else we were told we were supposed to be. And a lot of us blamed ourselves rather than looking at the context for it. So the book goes into a lot of different reasons why the midlife experience of Generation X women is often tough. And I'll start out by saying, number one, I'll just list three. One, our expectations were very high. So a lot of us were raised as latchkey kids by absent working parents in this very bleak economy. A lot of women told me about like terror around Russia, like any day it was going to happen, that we were going to be in that, like in Red Dawn. And we were raised with this without this permissiveness that our parents had. So one song has it that we were the cleanup crew for parties we were too young to attend. Our parents got sex and drugs and rock and roll and Woodstock and all that, and we grew up in the midst of the like Students Against Drunk Driving and the AIDS crisis and a lot of things that were scary and unpleasant. We're very scared about money as a generation, and there's a reason for that. We have a lot of debt. We have very low job stability. There's this equality of opportunity project at Harvard that said Gen Xers parents had a 90% chance of doing better financially than their parents. Gen X women only have like a 50% chance. And if you look at just women's income with their fathers, for women born around when we were born, only about a quarter will out earn their fathers. Third is we're taking care of more people with less help. So a lot of women in our generation, if they had kids, and a lot didn't have kids, but if they did, they had them late. So 30s, 40s often. And as a result, it's really common to have little kids and aging parents who need us at the same time. That is hard. I describe it not as the sandwich generation, but as the rack It feels very much like being pulled in a torturous way in different directions. Also, we were born during a baby bust. So, where other generations maybe had multiple nieces and nephews and kids to take care of the, aging grandmother, now there are far fewer people around to do the work. Um, Men do more, much more than their fathers and grandfathers did in terms of, changing diapers, picking up from school, that kind of thing. But they do not do half. They don't do nearly half, according to a lot of research. So women are doing, again, while working full time, a lot of the caregiving for multiple generations. And I would just say the cherry on top of all of this is perimenopause, which I devote a chapter to because people just don't talk about it. And it can be very intense. About 80% of women have serious symptoms. They can include hot flashes, mood swings, weight gain. It's a ton of stuff. And a lot of women suffer in silence because they're embarrassed or they don't have any information. They don't know that that's what they're going through. So there's a very long chapter in the book about all of that. So, inevitable question, what can be done? The book is not going to recommend like a diet or an app or anything like that. I have nothing to sell. But what I've heard from a lot of women who've read the book is that it removes this like shame around these issues and the sense of loneliness that we can feel at this stage of life. And I really do think that's the first step toward actually anything changing in a real way. There's that James Baldwin quote, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And I believe that wholeheartedly. I will say though, when pressed for some kind of advice, that one thing is that we need to change our expectations. So a lot of women sang this Anjali song to me, the advertisement, when I was doing interviews. And I don't know if you at home know it. It's worth a YouTube if you don't remember it. But it was like, we can bring home the bacon and fry it up in a pan and never let you forget you're a man. And it's sung to that Peggy Lee song, I'm a Woman, right? It's like brainwashing at its finest. This idea that this is going to be some kind of prize, right? To like get to do everything. And we were sold it that way. We were sold this idea that it wasn't like going to be hard or maybe unfair to have to do most of the childcare and household stuff while also having the same pressure to make a living. And that pressure would get more intense as the economy went down and as the pressures grew from having to be 24/7 because of social media and email. It's not a prize. It's like it's really hard. So first step is sort of deprogramming. Second step is just realizing that midlife is a uniquely hard time in general. It's hard in new ways for us, and it will end. So just this recognition that there is a time stamp on all this, on middle age. Third thing is getting support from everywhere you can. So I'm a big proponent of finding community and starting clubs, assembling like an Ocean's 11 team of like, instead of a safe breaker, it's like a good gynecologist and an accountant and a shrink and just anywhere you can find any help at this stage of life is good. And I think the thing that a lot of women have written to me and said is the thing to keep in mind. It's like we aren't alone. This is a very common experience for a lot of women right now, and it helps to know that we have this community out there. Okay, that is my wrap up of the book. My 15-minute description of it. This is the book again. And I would love to answer any questions or talk about anything anybody wants to talk about. If you put questions in either the comments on YouTube or Facebook, they will show up next to me. Oh my God, a lot of talk about the cat. I love I love Max the cat, Annie's cat. Oh my God, yay toast. Thank you, Melanie Richards, very much. That is the weird peanut butter cheese that from my childhood. I really do appreciate that. Okay, ask questions. They will show up here. I will guess one question, which I've been getting a lot, which is how does the pandemic affect this? It makes it all worse, right? It makes it all much, much worse. So the caregiving gets worse, the job instability gets worse, the finances get worse, and the caregiving gets worse. So I have a 14-year-old in the next room who's been doing online school. I have my very, aging rapidly parents who are in their late 70s, and my dad has cancer. So I've been very afraid that they were gonna get COVID. It's a harder time. The one upside that I've heard is that as a generation, we are very prepared for tragedy and crisis, that we've been living a lot of our lives in crisis mode and with a lot of stress. And that in some way it was like training, like this is the Olympics of stress and anxiety, and that we every day have been working out for it. So I kind of like that idea. And also this, there's some great like memes about Generation X not needing to be told twice to watch more television and stay inside and not talk to people. Because as a generation, that is something that we have really excelled at. I would say that. So yeah, so terrible, terrible, and uniquely suited to us. We've done well as a generation in this moment. A lot of the kind of good news and good stories in this time have been Generation X people really stepping up and doing great things. Annie, do you have any questions?
I do. So yeah, you mentioned at the beginning, you were going through your crisis and you thought, oh, well, it's just, this has got to just be white women in Brooklyn, which, it's kind of a joke, but it's like maybe was real, but then it turned out that it was more universal. So can you talk a little bit about how it turned out that way? Like, how did you get your interview subjects? What, if anything, did you find about the struggles among white women versus Black women versus other women of color? Like, was there, similarities and differences in what everyone is going through?
Yes, good question. So yeah, that was one thing that I noticed in a lot of the books about middle age I'd read. It was really geared toward one group or another, that it was very segmented. So one thing I wanted to do with the article and then also with the book was try to cast a very wide net. So geographically and racially. The ways that I did restrain it were by class. I tried to keep it like mostly middle class, so not women who were super poor or super rich, but women who sort of mostly grew up with this expectation that they would be able to like go to college and do all the stuff, and then had this experience in midlife of like, oh, wait a minute, like, was that a realistic expectation? And but no, so in the course of trying to find people, one thing that was really great about doing the article for Oprah was I was able to send out these calls through all their social media channels and gather like hundreds of comments and names and things that I would then reach out to for interviews. And I tried to make sure I got like every state and that racially it looked like America. So I worked hard to kind of make sure the percentages of each group like kind of roughly tracked with the nation. I reached out to a lot of experts also. I tried to find people through churches and shrinks and different programs. There were a couple really great like programs of women in middle age who'd come together for the sole purpose of trying to figure out like what the hell was going on. And I talked to like those women in those groups. So yeah, and what was really interesting is there are certain differences, right? So one thing is that menopause hits Black and Hispanic women way harder, and there's maybe even less information about that. And in terms of like if there's less access to like medical care in certain areas, that's going to be even worse because even like so I went to like the doctor every year, right, for my annual exam and checkups and all that. And like nobody said the word perimenopause to me until I was writing this article. And it made me so angry knowing that, that I was really determined to just provide as much information as possible about those things. Oh, there's questions. Look, Annie. Oh, this is a good one. Camille says, thoughts on connecting ACEs or emotionally absent parents to Gen X responses to current stressors. So, do people know what ACEs are? It's adverse childhood experiences. And this is one of the things I love reading about, because basically, if you have more than four, and Camille, correct me if I'm wrong, if you have more than four of these adverse childhood experiences, and those could include like parents divorcing, alcoholic parents, sexual abuse, there's a lot of different ones. And if you have more than four, you're way more susceptible to a million things: depression, suicide, diabetes. Like, there's this whole host of things. And this was a study done, I believe, by Kaiser Permanente in California with a relatively affluent group of people. And it tracks no matter what the other factors are. So in terms of like economics and race, this is a consistent finding. And I reached out because I had the same thought, which is like, if parents are absent, if there's a lot of latchkey kids, is it true that there are higher ACEs? Also, as you know, in the 90s and in the 80s when we were growing up, things that were through the roof were murder, um, sex crimes, abuse. Like, all of these things were soaring exactly when we were the most vulnerable for those things. There aren't any studies. So that's the answer. It's like not a very satisfying answer, but I did reach out to some people who are experts in those things. And one of them told me, kind of like not affiliated with the program, but she said just in her own personal research on her own, Gen X is the least parented generation, like, ever. So we had the least like oversight and least nurturing and nourishment. And therefore, she said she expected to see in this generation just a host of attachment issues. So I think that's what you're mentioning, was like, yeah, that's definitely, it seems true. I don't have any proof. But I will say also that almost every book event that I did before the pandemic started, women would talk about trauma. I mean, and just like they all would. I mean, somebody would say something about having experienced trauma in childhood, and everybody would just be nodding. We're a messed up generation, and it does, because of the ACEs stuff. Like, it does, I think, manifest itself in a lot of different ways: physically, emotionally, psychologically, flinching. We're a mess. Yes. Okay. Then Sheila says, I found the information you gave in the book about our generation overthinking communication very insightful. Oh, thank you. I have found as more millennials have entered the workforce that this has really made me feel a bit, quote, left out. That is really interesting. Yeah, I think I quoted my best friend, Asia. She lives in New Orleans. We grew up together on the Lower East Side in New York City. And I think, and Sheila, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it was, she was talking about how, like, she works with millennials, and they were all like sending each other memes all the time. And she said something like, aren't you afraid that somebody is going to receive it and not understand it, or they're going to be upset by it, or there's going to be some kind of uncomfortable thing. And they looked at her like she was crazy. And she realized also her parents and her parents' generation were sending like news clippings willy-nilly to everybody, and also not really worried about it. And she said she realized there was this real contrast to when we were growing up, and even now, where we'd like give somebody something. And the example she used was like a mixtape. Like, if we made a mixtape for somebody and we spent, I don't know, an entire weekend making it, and that we'd hand it to someone and be like, oh, it's probably terrible. You'll probably hate it, whatever, it doesn't matter. And I think there is this sense of, as a generation, we tend to not have that kind of blustery confidence that it seems sometimes like millennials and boomers have. And I guess I haven't even defined Gen X, but born roughly between 1965-ish and 1980. That's the sort of rough, those are the rough timelines. But it, I say in the book, I think like if you know what sound a dial-up modem makes, if you owned a koosh ball, if you had pins on your jean jacket, these are signs that you may have been Generation X. Sheila says, yep, the memes. That is what I'm talking about. And our generation, and the mixtape comment was so true. I will tell Asia you said that. She's very wonderful. It's interesting, the millennial thing too. And I don't beat up on boomers or millennials in the book. I don't want to, because the point is it's different for us. It's not necessarily like better, worse. Overall, I think that there are things to recommend each generation's experience and things that are extra hard for each generation. But I will say we don't get a lot of attention, right? Like millennials and boomers, like there's a lot about them out there. And for our generation, it just, there is this sense of that, we were latchkey kids our whole childhood. And then now it's like, oh, they just take care of themselves. Don't worry about them. There was a Saturday Night Live skit related to this where I think it was millennials versus boomers. And then they were all fighting about something. And it was like, this game show competition. And then Kenan Thompson was the game show host. And he said something like, oh, don't look at me. I'm Gen X. I just sit back and watch the world burn. So I thought that was very appropriate. Any other questions?
I'll come back on and ask another. Thank you, everyone, for sending in your questions and keep doing it. What was something that surprised you in your interviews? Like maybe something that didn't align necessarily with your personal experience, but something that did turn out to be common among this generation, among other people as well.
Yeah, so I would say, one thing was this sense of being pushed to do a lot more. So this one woman told me that she wanted to be a nurse, and she told her mother, and her mother said, no, you're not going to be a nurse. You're going to be a doctor. Like, how about a surgeon? There was a sense that like you had to really aim higher because there were so many more possibilities open to us. It was true that our mothers, grandmothers, they were told they could be nurses or they could be teachers, right? Like homemaker, teacher, nurse. And so there was this pressure that you had to do something far greater, even if you didn't want to. And that was, I think, the thing that this woman who wanted to be the nurse said that she carried out of that conversation was this sense that, like, because you could do anything, you had to do everything, and you had to do it all perfectly. And it didn't matter what you wanted. There was this kind of larger purpose to achievement, and you had to just achieve. And it was something that I heard from a lot of women, this sense of what's enough? Like nothing felt like enough. And a lot of women that I spoke with who had families but never had careers would say, like, what did I do wrong? Why don't I have a career also? And a lot of women I talked to had careers but didn't have families or didn't have some other social life that they thought they were going to have, would say, I only have a career. Like, how did I screw this up so badly? And I think that is that's a result of this pressure that we had put on us early on. And what I try to do in the book is just like debunk it. It's not true. Like it's very hard. Like this whole like having it all thing in our generation really meant like doing it all. And we don't have to do it all. There's no reason. Like it was all just a conspiracy to sell Angeli perfume and not real.
You mentioned a lot of the compounding different factors that are going into this. Did you find among the people you talked to that there was sort of like an inciting incident sometimes, like for it to be called a midlife crisis? Is there a timeline on that? Like, did people usually have some sort of straw that broke the camel's back usually, or?
Yeah, a lot of women, I think, it's funny because I think it's snuck up for a lot of women where it would be like the same way that I think perimenopause does, where it just sort of like things start getting a little weird. You're like, what's happening? Like moods get weird, and then like what? And I would say that there were definitely a lot of women describe moments where they snapped. So there's one woman from Nashville who told this story where she was like holding it all together, right? She had this really stressful job and she was like taking care of the kids, and she was just like, keeping it all going, all the plates in the air. And then her husband had like one thing he was supposed to do, which was pay the electric bill. And she got a call like in business meeting, get call, like it's like the nanny at home saying, it's really cold, like it's like the heat's gone off, I'm here with the kids. And her husband was skiing like with his like buddies or whatever for his birthday weekend. And so she had to like, and then because it had been shut off, she had to like go to the electric company and pay it in person. And like, it was just this totally bonkers nightmare day where she had to do all this crazy stuff. And for her, that was this moment of like, just snapping. So sometimes it was somebody else doing, and just realizing at that point, like, this is unsustainable. So I think there were moments for a lot of the women in the book where it was like, this is not going to keep going. There was one woman who was like walking through grocery store, like with the baby, getting the groceries, doing that stuff, and like got a ping, and it was like her Amazon saying like, your book is on the way. And it was like a book about non-monogamy that she had not ordered. And it was like, so her husband had ordered it on their like Amazon account. And she was like, can't believe like I'm doing all this. And now I have to have a conversation about whether or not to like open our marriage, like while juggling baby children thing. So yeah, just, I'm not saying it's not all bad husbands. Like, I'm not saying it's all, because Gen X men go through a lot too, and most of them are lovely, but those were theirs. Oh, there's one comment. What blind spots might Xers have in and about the workplace that would not occur to younger colleagues? In and about the workplace. So there's actually a lot of books about this, like about this interaction between different generations in the workplace, that I think it's really interesting, because like, I don't think it is the case that there have been this many generations all together at once in the same workplaces. And also one thing that you see a lot is that millennials tend to like leapfrog over Generation X, because there's this hyper valuation on technology and social media and all that kind of stuff, which is seen as like something millennials do. So then they get these higher jobs, and then boomers are not retiring. So it's like, so boomers are staying a long time, millennials are kind of leaping over. And one thing I've heard a lot, I don't work in the corporate world a lot, but I do have friends who do. And they say there is this sense that Gen X grew up kind of like just taking it, like whatever it was, just like an absolute lack of entitlement, and a real, just like, this is the way it is, this is how it goes, like, and it sucks, but this is it. And it sort of annoyingly for some Gen Xers, but then maybe to their credit also, a lot of millennials seem more into changing things. And I would say that's true socially. And I think it's true in jobs also. So they fight for things that they maybe want, which seems hard for a lot of the Gen Xers I know to really grapple with. Like, wait, what? And then sometimes it's like, wait, we don't have to put up with that? I thought we did. And then sometimes it's like, oh, come on, it's fine. You should not be so complainy. Did that answer that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And then there was a comment. I'm curious how much you learned about Gen X men's role in all this. Yeah. So I think there was actually Rumaan Alam, the novelist. He reviewed the book for the New Republic, and he said by the end of the book, he thought he was going through menopause, which I thought was a compliment. I think that except for that physical stuff and the expectations pressure, I think all of the book basically applies to Gen X men too. They had it hard also. And I think, the same kind of thing where there was a real loneliness to the Gen X childhood. And I think that hit men at least as hard as kids, right? Where they like just didn't have a lot of support. They didn't have a lot of role models for how to make relationships work because of all that divorce. And they had to really fend for themselves. And I think the good version of the relationship between Gen X men and Gen X women is like recognizing that we're all like shipwrecked souls, like we are all like on the same sad island of misfit toys, and that we can kind of see one another's humanity and help each other. But one story I heard a lot was that men of this generation do so much more in terms of helping in a household than their parents did, their male role models, fathers and grandfathers, that they're very happy about what they're doing. And that a lot of women told me that now not only do they have to do more than half of the household work, but they have to kind of flatter their male partners for what they do. So it's like, oh, thank you so much. You took the kid for one day. Like, I'm so grateful to you. So they have to kind of perform their gratitude while also still doing most of the work. The good news is that for millennials and below, all the studies I've seen show that they're way more equal. And like there's this AARP thing that says millennial caregivers, it's 50% men, which is amazing, right? It's like in terms of taking care of aging parents, that's a real sea change. And that's going to be really great for our kids and the next generations. Oh, thanks so much, Camille. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm wondering, since you're talking about like trends, you started to mention, and we've had in the comments a little bit of mentions of my generation, millennials. Sorry, it's okay. We're getting yelled at by Gen Z now, so like we're going through it anyway. It doesn't matter. So trend-wise, is there anything that you uncovered in your interviews? Obviously, you mostly spoke to Gen X, but in comparing it to the generation before you and what seems to be coming after, do you see trends similar to the one you just mentioned about caregiving, or what?
Yeah.
Hypothesize wildly, please, Ada.
I like your generation very much, Annie. I have my son is Gen Z and my stepson is millennial, and I look at them and I look at their friends and I'm just very pleased, like I think with the whole future. I'm really thrilled. So I think that you guys are very resourceful and I think also just more realistic. I think maybe Gen X was this expectation, this like experiment in expectations, and it was not successful, right? I think we were, it was a trial. Like they were trying this out, and the result is showing now, which is that putting that much pressure on women, on girls, and sending them out into the world without really clearing a path for them. In a lot of ways, I'm not saying that boomers didn't do a lot, because God knows, like that's not women going to the workplace in the 70s. I would not wish that on anybody. Women put up with horrible stuff, like really macro aggression stuff. But I would say that like we thought we were going to do great. Like we were really led to believe as a generation that it was going to be kind of easy and awesome to do all these things. And then it wasn't. And we were really shocked. And it's been a very rude awakening. Millennials, I don't think, are going into adulthood thinking it's going to be better than it is. I could be wrong, but I feel like you guys are like saw us and saw everything else, happening. And we're like, oh, okay, this is going to be really rough. And so it's maybe, cold comfort, but I think not being set up and then knocked down might give you some advantage. Unfortunately, the economic stuff does not look like it's going to be like way better for millennials or Gen Z. So you're probably going to be on that same kind of downward trajectory that we began. Yay!
Did you find, this could be completely not right, and I'm not an expert, but like, did you find anything about the way like the current understanding and the waves of feminism has affected like women's journey into midlife? Like, you know, how, like what feminism is at the moment I was growing up versus someone else?
I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what it is right now. I don't know. I'm curious what you think. It's a little murky. Um, and I'm trying to, I don't know what wave we're on. Also, I feel like it was like, you know, you had the suffragettes and then you had the 60s radicals and then, you know, you had, so I'm a little confused about what's happening right now, frankly. And I think like the Me Too thing, I kind of was like really psyched about at first. And then now I'm like a little bit like, what's happening? It seems like things are getting um, a little strange. And we could talk about that for a whole nother hour. But I think that one thing that I see happening with younger generations, millennials, is fighting for stuff more. And one thing that I've heard from a lot of doctors I've interviewed is that younger women are much more aggressive about getting good care. So that they're not just like being ignored. They will not be ignored. You will not be ignored. And I think that that is great. So I think that that is a feminist movement of like, you have to pay attention. You have to like look at women's experiences, and especially like, you know, you have to look at the experience of women of color, and you have to like, everybody has to be at the table and like all that stuff. If that is, I think I want that to be what we're doing now. And sometimes it feels like we are, and sometimes it feels like there's other things going on that are
Yeah. Well, there
weird.
is a really strong capitalistic streak through feminism that really,
Yeah.
I don't know when, but sometime clearly in, you know, when I was growing up, I think it was
Yeah.
very related, all braided together. And it's only recently that it's like, you know, we've begun to pick apart that side of like corporate feminism in a way.
I think that's really a good point. And I, you know, that's something I try to talk about in the book too, this idea that I think women just get told that they can fix it if they spend enough money, you know, like that whatever they're dealing with, like, oh, sad, we got something for that. Like, you know, angry, like no problem, you know, and it's it's depressing. And like once you, I think, really look at like just realize, and I think also part of the reason that you have that is because it is hard to look at the fact that yeah, capitalism and these hierarchies and all this stuff, like they make it very difficult to be a middle-aged woman in America. And that is not something you're going to fix like in your house with like a chore chart. Like that's not going to happen. You can't spend your way out of it. You can't clean your way out of it. It's much bigger and more structural. And that's the other thing too about a lot of the more corporate feministy stuff. Don't you notice it's like so much about being calm, right? It's like all this like meditation and gratitude journals. It's like all this about gratitude. And I'm like, maybe that's not the best message. Like, if things are going to actually change and get better for younger women, maybe gratitude. I mean, I get it. Like, and I do it too. I do thank the things and whatever. But like, I think being angry is really valuable.
What was your favorite part of the book to write?
Oh gosh. I think the end, the last chapter is like basically about narrative. So when I write about when I write memoir, and then when I teach memoir classes, which I've done a few times and really enjoyed, um, I really like looking at like what's the beginning and the middle and the end of your story. Like who are the important characters in it, and what are the important scenes, and kind of thinking of yourself as the heroine of your own book. And I think that's very powerful, whether you're doing it for an actual book or just as an exercise. And that's something that I think can help a lot of us in the stage of life, is just like thinking of your life like a book and figuring out what it means.
All right. Well, you heard it, folks. You have to make it to the end of the book so that you can your favorite part. if there are any more questions, speak now. Start typing. It'll take about 10 seconds for us to see them, but if you want to do that, that's great. I'll just remind you that I did put the link to the book, which is available in paperback now, up earlier in the comments. So you can find that there. It'll take you to majorsandquinn.com. And you should check that out. You can also go ahead and look for Ada's other books, which you're such a fascinating writer in that, like, your topics. You're the kind of author who, like, people come in the store and you're like, I'm looking for Ada Calhoun. Where are her books? And you're one of the authors where it's like, well, they're in 3 different places completely, because they're about completely different, disparate, fascinating topics. So
thank you.
Those Renaissance people.
Thank you. Yes, I know it's like probably not good career strategy, but I get bored easy. So and I'll say my next book's coming out next year, and so it's spring 2022, and it's about the poet Frank O'Hara, who's like my favorite poet. And it's like a memoir about my dad and Frank O'Hara, and about the New York School of Poetry and growing up in Bohemia and
awesome. Yeah,
mothers and daughters.
That will be one more section. That'll be in the poetry, writing on poetry section. Well, Camille, Ada basically just answered that question. Although that book's probably almost done if it's publishing next year. So, anything else you want to write about?
I'm open to suggestions. Feel free to email them to me. I'm ghostwriting a lot in the meantime. That's something else I do. I'm on my 18th ghostwriting project.
Heck yeah, fun.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching and asking questions and saying hello, and listening to my cat, who is somewhere
Max
right now. And yeah, thanks for supporting an independent bookstore by tuning in to a event. Ooh, one more question, Sheila.
Oh, okay. In Under the Wire, Sheila. When you're researching for a book, how much is done online versus talking to people in person? So my hierarchy is I like to talk to people in person as much as possible, and then phone is second, and then online is a distant third. So I don't think anybody in the book was like an email interview or anything like that, because it does just, they feel like could be anybody. I'm very suspicious, like that people are, I don't know, not real. And I just think like in person is always best. I think, I don't know what the breakdown was for the book. It was probably, like half in person, half on the phone, something like that. But good question, Sheila.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, like I was saying, thank you so much for tuning in. When you watch our events, it makes it almost like we are having an in-store event, like we wish we could be doing. And so, it makes my job, better to see that there's actually people watching and talking, even though we can't be talking in person. So yeah, check out the book on our website, majorsandquinn.com. If you're in the area, you can shop in store. If not, the website is available 24/7. Thanks, Ada, so much. This is really, really wonderful, and we'll maybe see you in 2022 for the next one.
That would be great. Thanks, Annie. And great audience, great questions, and yay toast. Thank you. That would have kept me up all night. So